in North America, given the structure, it's never too early to prepare. Hello. The purpose of this brief video is to have a brief discussion on the studying of medicine in North America. North America includes Canada and the United States. However, the focus of my discussion will pertain to the Canadian context. That being said, for those of you who might be more interested in the American context, here's what I would say. When a conversation is had on any topic, um, the fact that a related conversation was not discussed doesn't mean that the conversation is not useful. That being said, by discussing what happens in Canada or for in the Canadian context, that can give you some direction in terms of what to look out for the American context. When it comes to career choice, career path, there's only so much a brief video can cover. However, my goal for my viewers is to have an idea of what to start to think about, is to have an idea of what direction to sail in this sea of information. One thing I will say for a start, because I have a lot of things to say, is that for those of you who are interested in pursuing a career in medicine, take the preparation thereof as a project, literally as a project. For some of my viewers who might have some familiarity with project management, I think you might have a better appreciation of what I'm talking about. There's many layers to this and there's many segments to this. So by segments, I mean things in a more linear fashion, like A, step B, step C. When it comes to layers, if we're talking about step A, we can discuss step A in layers from a more broader perspective to a narrower perspective. As I go into the content that I'm going to cover in this brief video, you'll understand what I mean by understanding things from a segmental perspective versus a layered perspective. Because I feel when it comes to a career in medicine, from the preparatory perspective, preparing to get into medical school, there's a lot of structure, directly or indirectly. There's a lot of structure, and part of the process or part of being successful with the process is even understanding that structure. I think I've been abstract so far, but let's get into it. So there are 5 areas I'm going to talk about, and because of time, um, I think I feel I'm able to discuss it on a more broad layer because each of the 5 things I'm going to talk about can be a whole video in and of itself. Some of my viewers who are watching, you may be interested in applying to medical school, and even if you're not interested, you might know someone who's interested in applying to medical school. Some of the things I'll talk about might be things you've heard before, and some things might be a bit of a surprise. In the event that some of the things I talk about come as a surprise, the good news is, well, it's no longer a surprise after you've watched this video. And for those of you who watch this video and find that there is no surprise, that's also good news because you're in the right direction. So the first topic I'd like to talk about is the citizenship and residency status. Yes. Now, in Canada, for some of the medical schools, an admission requirement is being a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen. In other words, if you meet a whole bunch of criteria, except for not being a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen, you may not get the admission because that is a requirement. So the thing about advice is advice helps with planning. If there's a list of things that a person needs to attain to qualify for something, it's kind of good to know what those things are well in advance because achieving one particular item may not be an overnight process. For example, if they say to enroll in this program, you need a blue shirt. Random example. It's not that difficult to get a blue shirt. You can get a blue shirt overnight. However, if they say, like in the case of some of the Canadian medical schools, that you need to be a permanent resident or a citizen, that doesn't happen overnight. That's quite a process in and of itself. So the citizenship and residency status is a thing in for Canadian medical schools. For US medical schools, I'm not sure, but these are things that you can now look out for, especially for viewers who may not be citizens of, of any country in North America. Here's the aspect of educational requirement. And I can only go so deep for the purpose of this brief video because there's many layers to it. So I finished the citizenship segment. Now I'm going into the educational requirement segment. So before I go any further, one thing I will say is that in North America, in Canada and the US, um, entering medical school is predicated on having a degree. And in many parts of the world, the system of medical education is such that you enter after completing secondary school. That's not the case in Canada. That's not the case in North America. You have a degree first, and among other things, apply to medical school. So in terms of educational requirement, that degree is often what people refer to as a pre-med. Now, there are requirements, and those requirements can vary from medical school to medical school. And even within a medical school, requirements might vary from year to year. This is why part of this project of keeping up with being a successful candidate for medical school requires being familiar with the structure. And this is what I mean by structure. Okay, what is the structure in terms of course requirements between this university and this university, or within a university from this year to that year? So that means you have to keep up with the requirements on a frequent basis, as frequently as possible. So let's say, for some of my viewers, say you're in your first year of your undergrad and you're familiar with what the rules are, and you don't look at the rules until third year. You do want to check for some of you, this might be something you do anyways, but for some of you, you might feel, well, I checked the rules last time. Well, last time was 2 years ago. So you have nothing to lose by spending the time to be familiar with the requirements. In the course of making this video, I looked up a medical school, and at least for Ontario medical schools, there's not necessarily a requirement of doing a certain program, for example, a degree in biology or a degree in biochemistry, microbiology. That is not necessary. Your pre-med can be diverse. That being said, there will be certain course requirements. For example, one university can say they need 2 full courses in life science and 2 health courses in the humanities. Another university can say we need 1.5 full courses in life sciences and social sciences and 1/2 course in arts and humanities, for example. So these are things for you to look out when you're comparing, when you're reviewing the requirements from school to school. So these are things to look out for. And like I said, even within a school, you want to see if those requirements change from year to year. There's as in addition to there being many segments to it and layers, there are quite a lot of moving targets. There's a lot of variation in the structure just by virtue of that. Also, one thing I would advise is it's important that you're familiar with terminology. So if they're saying things like full courses, half courses, and these are terms you would see on the Ontario University's Application Center, the OUAC. They have all these information. That being said, do your homework to just make sure that what one university is calling a full course is the same thing as another university calling a full course. Under the OUAC, there is the Ontario Medical School Application Service, the OSAS. Again, this is under the OUAC. I would say, in terms of things to look out for, familiarize yourself with the Ontario Medical School Application Service. And in terms of structure, there are other things. This can be both structure and educational requirements. One being the MCAT, the Medical College Admission Test, language and tests of language proficiency. And there's another one called CASPER, CASPER, CASPER. So these are things that you can follow up on. So for those of you who are just watching are just getting familiar, maybe you're hearing these names for the first time, but these are very relevant things to check. In terms of the content covered in this video, by no means is it exhaustive. And in terms of being comprehensive, I will try as much to be as comprehensive given the duration of the video. So in terms of educational requirements, again, one program isn't necessarily more favored or more preferred over the other. So what am I saying? So say you're an individual, you're in first year of your undergraduate, and you're enrolled in biology. Yes, it's all right to be enrolled in a biology degree program, but you don't necessarily have to because of the structure. I think when it comes to careers and whatnot, a lot of times information gets passed around, and this information all of a sudden becomes a belief. Yes, if you have a degree in biology, that's fine. But then if you had a degree, say in psychology, you're not necessarily less advantaged. Why? Because as far as the admissions are concerned, as long as you have your credits, so say you have a psychology degree and you had 4 credits in the life sciences, as far as the admission process is concerned, and I'm saying strictly speaking about the admission process, you've met the requirements. So the reason why I say that is there's also the aspect of GPA. So if your strength, like I wouldn't necessarily say that one course is easier than another course, but I could say that one course could be your strength and again, that's going to vary from person to person. So if if for you, for example, psychology is your strength, you might want to pick a degree program that you will excel at because it's your strength, not necessarily because it's easy or easier than some other courses. In terms of the degree program, yes, we've talked about marks, we've talked about MCATs and the OUAC and the structure. One thing to have at the back of your mind, one thing that would be beneficial to have at the back of your mind would be strategy. Now, when you're doing your undergraduate degree, it's strategic to pursue an undergraduate degree in something that you can fall back on. So what am I saying? So say you apply to medical school and for whatever reason you don't make it in the year that you applied. It would be to your benefit to still have something in hand, your degree, that is something you can hold on to and fall back on. And fall back on can mean different things to different people. Fall back on could mean, oh, I can fall back on this, as in I can get a job with this. Fall back on could mean I can fall back on this and be a good candidate for a graduate program, for example. So these are things to consider. So for example, if you have an aptitude for math and you're good at programming, you might want to even do a degree in computer science. That as you're doing your degree in computer science, yes, as a pre-med, you are taking the necessary prerequisite courses. So this could be 1 or 2 or 3 courses in the life sciences. So say you applied to medical school and you didn't get in, your computer science degree is something you can fall back on in the sense that you could work with it. Or say you want to do a master's program in computer science, you're in position to because you have a bachelor's degree in computer science. Also, language proficiency, that's something you might want to look into. Some medical schools may have some requirements regarding language proficiency. So when it comes to preparing for a career in medicine in North America, given the structure, it's never too early to prepare. The reason why I say that is, for example, say say that there's a language proficiency aspect. You might want to get your language proficiency test done whenever you have time. So say they have like a 5-year valid, say they're valid for 5 years. You might want to do your language proficiency test after high school, for example, in preparation for your medical school application 4 years down the line. Because doing that there's a saying, a stitch in time saves 9. Also, extracurricular, community service, community work, volunteering, references, these are worthwhile because they can make your medical school application stand out to exemplify the relevance of preparing in advance. So, for example, say you finished your high school and you have it in the back of your mind that you'd love to be a cardiologist one day. This is how thinking ahead of things kind of helps, even though it might seem like it's in the distant future. In your undergrad, you may have an opportunity come your way where you get to work with a cardiologist who's also a researcher at a university. Again, going back to what I said about being strategic, you could strategize your undergraduate career, your undergraduate education, such that you decide to either do a summer of research or even volunteer in this cardiologist lab. You do a great job, you get a reference from this cardiologist, and that will go a long way, both from the perspective of applying to medical school, and you never know, after you're done medical school, say you were keeping in touch with this cardiologist the whole time, or you were always doing projects with him or her in the summers, it might even be useful when you get to the point of residency. Discussion of residency is a little bit out of the scope of this video. Nonetheless, it's worth mentioning. So when it comes to planning your extracurricular, your course requirements, it's good to have these at the back of your mind. Reason why it's never too early, and reason why it's always good to have at the back of your mind is when potential opportunities come by, it'll catch your attention because it's already at the back of your mind. So say you really want to be a cardiologist, and say you overheard something about some cardiology summer camp or some cardiology seminar. Because you had it at the back of your mind, that information will catch your attention. If it wasn't at the back of your mind, it may not have caught your attention. So there's a bit of a domino effect going on there. And one thing I'll finish off with is perspectives. When it comes to a career in medicine, it's quite a journey. It's good to factor in perspectives, including perspectives that may not be too relevant to you in the moment. So this is where I'm going. So say, for example, having a family is a non-career aspiration you have. You might want to just also have that at the back of your mind, that is this a path I want to embark on, given that I want to have these other personal things down the line. It helps. It helps in the planning so hopefully the information covered herein will get you thinking in the right direction. In terms of the MCAT, again, the MCAT, I did put up the link to the MCAT. I did put up the link to some links that you might find useful. One of it is the MCAT, the OUAC, the OMSAS, and also I did put a link that directs you to all the medical schools in Canada. The things I had discussed with the OUAC and the OMSAS, that is Ontario specific. But then, like I said, because I've had this brief conversation on the OUAC and the OMSAS, should kind of put you or give you an idea of what to look out for in other provinces, or what to look out for in the US. So hopefully this information was relevant. And for those of you who might be international students, for instance, and by international students, because that's relative, I mean for those of you who may not be American citizens or residents, or Canadian citizens or residents. These are things to have at the back of your mind: the citizenship requirement, language proficiency, and again, some things that you might be able to fall back on. So these might be things to look out. Those of you applying to medical school, I wish you all the best. And if you're not interested in applying to medical school, kindly do share this video with persons that are interested in studying this.